Basically, to get up to the house, you have to take a ride on this tram that he built. He commissioned a company to come out and build this thing for him. It takes about 3 minutes to get from the driveway up to the house itself. And that tram served as a really helpful tool during the construction process to get materials up to the site. Hey everybody, I'm Scott with Real Estate Report, and today I'm here with Estate Media to tell my stories behind the listings. Yeah, so this was an interesting one because at the time I was still relatively new on YouTube, and my initial plan when I started making videos was I wanted to talk to people about how to flip houses because that's what I was doing. I was flipping houses, but I realized pretty early on that those videos weren't getting very many views. And so I started to slowly pivot towards telling more news stories, and I started talking about some more dramatic development stories in LA. I picked up on this story and I started talking about this home called The One that was being built in LA. It was 100,000 square feet. It was supposed to be a $500 million house. And so I just started reporting on it because I thought it was an interesting story. And the contractor reached out to me and he was basically like, hey, I love the videos you're making about this listing or about this property. The property's getting kind of a lot of negative press right now, but you're putting a positive spin on it. Like, I want to invite you out to come see the house in person. Would you be interested? And I was like, heck yes, I would be. What stood out to me the most about the construction process of this one, even though the house was basically finished when I toured it, was just the scale of everything. When you walked through the front door, you realized just how much work it must have taken to excavate that lot, to bring in all the concrete, to bring in the lumber package, to bring in all the finished materials. The house took like 10 years to build, and when I walked through it, I wasn't surprised that it took that long. Well, in this case, what made this house the most expensive was just the rumored asking price. Like at the time that I toured it, they were rumored to ask $500 million for this house. And so it was kind of just an imaginary number at that point in time, but the price was justified by the developer because he basically was like, look, this property is one of one. It will never be able to be recreated again in California because of zoning rules. There's a lot of billionaires out there who might spend $500 million on a yacht. And so why wouldn't they be interested in buying a $500 million house in one of the best locations in the world? Yeah, so whenever we first showed up, I got there with my small film crew. And typically what we do on a home tour like this is we'll just do a quick walkthrough. So I understand like the floor plan, the layout, and some of the key details around the house. So we'll do a walkthrough first with a contractor or architect or whoever. And then we'll go back to basically the front door and we'll start the tour. But on this one, I knew it was going to be different because we started to do our initial walkthrough, and 45 minutes later, I'm looking at everyone and I'm like, the film crew is already exhausted and we haven't even started rolling yet. So at that point, I was like, okay, this house is unlike anything we've ever done or seen before. We need to just go back to the front door and start rolling now and film as we go and get my natural reactions as we move about this house, because there's just so many sections and so many corners to the house and basements and levels and guest houses that like the property just felt like it went on forever. I mean, the entire experience of it, from the moment that you turn off of Sunset all the way to getting to the top of the hill, realizing that whoever owns this house is going to be like the king of Bel Air. You're at the very, very top of the hill. You have views in every direction. The scale is just unimaginable. And so I think just the experience as a whole to walk through such a mammoth of a house is so unique and unusual. And like I said, it's something that I know I won't be able to ever experience again. This place is really one of a kind. So the story behind the location on this one is this house is located in Sedona, Arizona, which is a magical place. And the specific lot of this house is basically at the top of a relatively small mountain in Sedona. It's about 200 feet in the sky. And basically how it went is the guy who I toured this house with, his name's Glendon, he bought this lot about 10 years ago or so at a time when the lot was for sale, but nobody thought that you could build on it because the house is literally at the top of the mountain, and a very, very steep mountain. But he, against all odds, put the right team together. He's a very creative guy, and he ultimately went on to build a house there. So Glendon had an interesting story where a house that he grew up in, his parents built in a very kind of challenging terrain somewhere out in California. And so he had very limited exposure to having to build in conditions like this. And so when he saw this lot, because he was a furniture maker and because he's already kind of a skilled tradesman, and because he had that history as a child living in a house where the build conditions were a little challenging, he looked at the lot for sale and he was like, I can figure this out. I can make it work. Well, the most unique factor of all was that tram. So you see that in the intro of the video and then throughout the video. But basically, to get up to the house, you have to take a ride on this tram that he built. He commissioned a company to come out and build this thing for him. It takes about 3 minutes to get from the driveway up to the house itself. And that tram served as a really helpful tool during the construction process to get materials up to the site. In addition to that, though, there were some things that were just too big or too heavy to carry on the tram. And so he actually had to bring in a helicopter to come and drop materials off on the job site. So yeah, it was a crazy complicated house to build. I mean, I personally didn't feel any risk or vertigo. I'm really big into mountain biking, and so I've spent a lot of time on cliffs like this in Sedona riding my mountain bike. So to me, it was just kind of like whatever. I wasn't thinking much of it. My videographer, Chloe, I don't think she was very scared either because we knew we were in good hands. Glendon, he put so much love and attention into every aspect of this build, so we felt very safe throughout the process. But to me, even though the house was cool and the finishes were nice and the views were insane, the most memorable part for me for sure was that tram ride from the driveway up to the house. It was completely surreal, and I don't know, I just loved it. He really put a lot of thought into safety throughout the entire build. So like when you're riding that tram, the walls on the sides of the tram go up to like chest height, and so you don't feel like you're gonna fall off of it. When you get up to the house, even though there's views everywhere, he's got railings everywhere, you never really feel like you're about to fall off the cliff. So you are perched up on top of a 200-foot cliff, but you never feel unsafe. I mean, I think the rooftop deck was probably an underrated feature because we didn't spend much time there in the video, but that's where the views were the best. And Glendon actually has a little garden there at the top. So basically on top of his house, he's got a little vegetable garden. The views are great. There's a cool breeze coming through, which was really nice. There's birds and hawks flying around and stuff. And so there's a lot of great that came with that house and that tour. In the video, we probably only spent like 10 seconds up there, but we spent a lot more time up there in real life because it was pretty cool. So this house was in Paradise Valley, Arizona. So also another Arizona property, and walking through it honestly just felt like a time capsule. It was very surreal. I'd seen tons of pictures of this house. I've driven by it a dozen times before, but I'd never been inside. And so, yeah, experiencing it inside because of all of the finishes and furnishings are kind of period correct. There's a lot of Frank Lloyd Wright memorabilia hanging up all around the house. It felt like you were walking into the house exactly in the way that Frank Lloyd Wright intended it to be when he built it like 60 or 70 years ago. Yeah, so Frank Lloyd Wright, I mean, I'm not entirely qualified to say who he is and all of his history and accolades, but he's basically one of the most influential and iconic architects to have ever lived. He's done homes and commercial properties all over the United States. There's dozens and dozens of examples like this that still exist that are really, really nicely preserved, and he's looked up to by pretty much anybody who's in the architectural or design scene. I'd say probably about 85% of this house is original, or at least feels original. It has been restored a couple of times since it was originally built, but a couple modern amenities that have been added over the years, like the air conditioning system was all completely revamped. A swimming pool was added at some point, I want to say the 90s. So some little things like that, but for the most part, it looks exactly like it did when it was built. When you walk through the front door, you're walking through this tight corridor that has a ceiling height that's like really close to your head. And then after you walk through the front door and through the foyer, it opens up into this like bigger great room type space. He called it compression and release. And he did that really intentionally to give this certain feel or experience when you're like entering the house. And to be able to experience that in person was really cool. I was like, oh, I get it. This compression and release thing is actually like awesome. It felt great touring a house that has some architectural history like this. In fact, that's kind of my preference. I live in an old historic home myself. I'm really drawn to this mid-century modern style and vibe. And so when I walk through a house like this, sure, I love the glitzy, glamorous style mansions that are built today. but I much more gravitate towards houses that look like this. There's a lot of warm materials in these old homes. It feels cozy. They feel like houses that you could actually live in. So this mansion, I started talking about it maybe 3 or 4 years ago or so. It's in Bel Air, California. So I tend to gravitate towards houses that are being built in Bel Air because there's just a lot of interesting, crazy stories that were coming out of that area, Bel Air, Beverly Hills, Brentwood, during that time frame. What drew me to this one in particular was that Mohammed Hadid himself was an interesting guy as the developer of the project. He's also very controversial, which is probably what helps these videos to do really well and perform well on YouTube. But what drew me to it is that it was a controversial and crazy situation. He built this $100 million mansion is what he was calling it, and the city basically ordered him to tear the house down. And so it was another one of those like unprecedented situations, a story that you don't hear every day and you actually probably will never hear again. And so that drew me to it initially. I started making videos about the story. It seemed like people were really enjoying the videos. And so I continued to do it up until the point where we went and toured the house, which is what we're looking at today. The scale of it still surprised me, which is crazy because the public perception of this house is that it was huge and it was way oversized for the lot. And so that was the controversy. But when you drive up to the house, it felt a little bit modest. But as soon as you get down into the driveway, even though it was a complete construction zone, the scale was just out of control. They had torn most of the house up at that point. 30,000 square feet is about how big it was, which is a lot of square footage. But when you were walking around, there was just like every corner you turned, there was this other massive space that you didn't even expect to find. And so, yeah, the scale surprised me for sure. I approach a story like this very delicately because I want to try to respect the story as much as possible by telling the story as accurately as possible. It's a sensitive situation whenever bankruptcies are involved or defaults are involved or lawsuits are involved. And so I try to always just take a pretty neutral approach with my videos. I never try to pick a side, even if in my mind I might have a side picked. I don't try to show that on camera because I want to be fair to all the parties involved. Oftentimes, even though I reach out to some parties for comment, I don't always get a response from people like the contractor or the developer or an attorney who's involved in the case. So yeah, I guess the simplest way to put it is I approach these stories very, very carefully. I think the biggest thing that this project revealed about the limits is that there are limits, and if you cross those limits, then the city is going to come after you. They sent a big message whenever they ordered him to tear that house down. I mean, he spent, I think it was 8 years and probably $50 million building this house, and he was literally ordered to tear it down. That is a wild message that the city sent, and I think that it probably sent a message strong enough to where we won't see other developers in the future make the same mistake. Well, this differs from your typical architectural home story because this was not that at all. This was all about the story and the drama and not so much about the house itself because, like you see in the footage, when we toured this house, it was a complete demolition zone. A week after we toured the house, it was completely razed. It was 100% gone. So we were touring a house that was ultimately a complete failure, really, in reality. And so it wasn't featuring all the cool design elements and architectural details. It was more telling the sad story of someone who was flying too close to the sun, and ultimately the city came after him. And so this was another Paradise Valley house, and my expectation before I showed up is that it probably would feel a bit industrial because this house was built just completely out of concrete and steel. It wasn't finished when I toured it. It was another construction site, but all you saw on site was concrete and steel. And to answer your question, it actually felt a lot warmer than I expected. They use these board form concrete walls throughout the property, which have a lot of texture on them and really warm up the vibe compared to what you might just see as a typical wall of drywall and just white paint or something. The board form concrete actually felt warmer than what you would see in a typical house. Same goes for the steel. It was very rusted, which gave it this like nice color and texture. So yeah, it didn't feel industrial at all. I think that what concrete and steel do as far as the feeling of living in the home more than anything else, and the architect in this video explained this way better than I could, but that is that they give a feeling of permanence. Like the house just feels like it's got weight and permanence whenever you're walking through it, because it is very permanent. Like he joked that this house will be here for 500 years and archaeologists will need to be digging through it to kind of like figure out why this one stood standing and all the other ones in the neighborhood are no longer around. But it was an interesting thing that he brought up, because this house was built so strong and it will stand so strong that when it's finished, it'll be able to stand there basically forever. I think the most unique construction technique or design technique that was showed to me during this video is that this particular architect is very, very in tune with nature and with the sun patterns. And so he spent a lot of time on site studying the sun, where it was in the sky during the winter months, where the sun was in the sky during the summer months. And he designed this house completely around the lot conditions and the sun patterns. Technically, all architects should be thinking about these things in this way, but he took it to another level. He was very passionate about this, and it was amazing to see in person. I think the biggest takeaway that I took away from walking this house is that if you want to build a house this different and this special and that it is just dialed in every way possible, you have to hire an architect that aligns with your vision and an architect that respects your vision. I don't know. I mean, I think innovation is what I'm most excited about. I'd like to see AI change things quite a bit. I saw some videos about 3D printed homes that are kind of sprouting up around the United States right now, which is exciting to me. I feel like for quite a while, we went through this phase of people wanting to build bigger and better and more extravagant. And we got to this point where I talk about it a lot on my channel about these $50, $100 million houses that were just being built and coming out every couple of months. And I think that maybe that market has become a bit oversaturated. I'd like to see things reeled back in and see more developers building houses that people can actually picture themselves living in and building those sustainably too. So just speaking to young builders and developers, the biggest piece of advice that I could give them is be prepared for a roller coaster if you're planning on getting into this business, and spend a lot of time getting educated and learning the ropes before you leap in yourself. So find a really good mentor or find a great company to work for and just shadow them and learn about every trade, learn about every part of the build process, learn how different designers work, learn how to read blueprints whenever architects put together a set of plans. And if you spend probably in reality a decade of time getting educated and building a strong foundation for yourself, then the next 30 years, you're going to make for a really good builder or developer. Hey guys, I'm Scott with Real Estate Report, and I want to thank Estate Media for allowing me to tell my stories behind the listings.